Hi, I'm Mrs. Rogier, and I will be teaching the 11th and 12th grade U.S. history next year. The book that we will be using is a Bob Jones book, United States History. It will be on the book list. Another book that we're going to be using that I will provide all the materials for this particular book, because we're going to be doing this once a week, is Constitutional Literacy. It's an apologia book. It's written by Michael Ferris, who is a Christian constitutional lawyer who has advocated for homeschools and other constitutional issues. It's a great curriculum that helps to really break down all the elements of the Constitution, what they mean, what the original intent was, what they mean for us, how we can apply them. And it really helps the kids to understand all the elements of the Constitution. So we're going to be doing that curriculum once a week so that by the end of the year, we would have much better knowledge of our entire Constitution and the amendments within it. And the other 4 days a week, we're going to be using our regular history book. In our history book, um, we will be discussing, we won't be spending a lot of time on it, but we will be discussing the explorers, the pilgrims, and things like that. But we're going to spend a little bit more time on the Revolution. Then we're going to go back to a more of a summary of um, Reconstruction and things like that. We'll spend a little time in the Civil War, and then we're going to move on from there and summarize so that we can get into sections that we haven't studied before. I know that we've covered the discovery of America and the Pilgrims, and we spent a lot of time in the Civil War era in 8th grade U.S. history. So I would like to have that as more of a discussion so that we can review what we've learned about that, point out anything that may be newly introduced in this book that wasn't in the younger book, and then that will also allow us time to move forward into chapters that we haven't been able to get to, because they always give so much more information in the book than we have time in the year to cover it. So we're going to be, this will allow us to get into studying the second half of, well, the beginning of the 20th century and through the second half of the 20th century. So World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and talking about the significance of those wars, plus other historical things that happened in the latter part of the 20th century that our kids, it happened before they were born, but we don't get to discuss it much in history because we don't have the time to get there. So we will be covering the entire book, but some chapters, don't be surprised if we skim over some chapters, and that's not because we don't think they're important, but it's because we've studied them extensively in other grades. And so the kids are quite familiar with that subject, and this is more of a review, and that will allow us to get into subject matter that we haven't had a chance to study as yet. On that note, a couple of the field trips I would like to have next year, if the restrictions and things allow for it, would be when we're in or around the Revolutionary War section, weather permitting, to go to Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts, because if you're familiar with the Revolutionary War, that's where the shot heard around the world was fired. There's a great museum there, the Lexington Concord Museum, and then a couple miles up the road is the Minutemen Museum, which is also quite interesting. That one is more weather permitting because you can walk the road, which runs, the paved road runs along the same path that the original road went. Of course, there's a sidewalk, but a lot of the homes that are there are in the famous paintings from that time period because those homes are still there. So it's quite historical, but a lot of it is outside. So that would be weather permitting. Also, obviously, virus permitting, whatever the restrictions would still be between traveling between the states. So that may or may not happen depending on what's going on with that. When we're in the World War II section, the field trip that I would like to take the kids is up to Wolfboro to the Wright Museum, because it's a wonderful World War II museum. They have an extensive home front section about what was going on at home during the war, but also things going on in the war overseas. So they do open special times when they're normally closed for the season for school groups. So depending on what the restrictions are next year, I will be in contact with them to see if we can schedule a field trip. And I think the kids will really enjoy it. My kids and I and my family have gone several times, and we enjoy it every time we go. They always have something new to see. But it really brings the reality of what life was like during that time period home so that the kids can really kind of get a grasp of what things were like back then and then compare it to now to see where we've come, as far as, housing expenses and things like that. So it's quite interesting for the kids. So, as far as the class goes, those are the two main books that we'll be using. And they will, from time to time, have projects they'll be doing or research papers they'll be doing, depending on where we're getting it and which chapters. Um, the rules that I have, and they come home usually with a contract at the beginning of the year that is just a homework contract that they sign, you sign, and I um, have sent home that just simply states that my homework rules are that they have 3 days to complete a homework assignment. Generally, if it's due the next day, they have 3 days in which to turn it in. But for every day that it's late, they lose 10 points. And after 3 days, it's not eligible to be turned in. Now, this is simply if they just didn't do the work or they forgot their work, but they were in class. If they were absent and it's an excused absence, um, then obviously whatever is in the handbook applies. But this is if they're in class and they didn't do their homework, they forgot it at home, whatever, they can bring it the next day, but it's 10 points off every day that it's late up to 3 days. And after 3 days, it's not accepted. That's across the board for all of my classes, middle school and high school. So just be aware that is really my one sticking homework requirement, and that is generally sufficient. The kids, I find, when they're in these grades are much, much better about remembering their work. Um, but I look forward to having your kids next year, teaching them history through the lens of our Christian worldview and understanding our relationship to each other as citizens, but also um, our foundations as a Christian nation, and looking at that then and now, and seeing where our relationship is with as citizens with God, and um, discussing with them how things have changed, what we can do to help things change for the better in the future, things like that. So I am really excited to teach this class again next year with your kids, and I hope you guys have a great summer, and I will see you next year. If you have any questions or concerns, I will be happy to address those. Please feel free to email me at krogier, Rogier, at tcca-nh.com. And I usually, within 24 hours, am able to get back, except for weekends, but during the week, within 24 hours, I'm usually able to reply to emails. So I would love to hear from you if you have any questions or concern, and we'll look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you.